Okay, before we dive in, let's talk a little bit about kind of where we are. You might remember that at various points in this class, I've said that we're kind of following music sort of in a linear way through time. And there are exceptions to that, but more or less that's true. So we started off with very simple music that goes all the way back to the medieval period. And then music has gotten more complicated as time has gone on. That's just the way it's gone. So now we're kind of up into the Romantic period. The Romantic period, roughly 1800 to 1900. I think officially it ends in 1909 or something like that. We are getting actually pretty close to the now. One thing that's really interesting about the Romantic period is it's really the first period where, and I don't want to get too far into the historic elements of it. I have some, music history courses if you're interested in this, but it is relevant to the music theory. This is the first period where the composer kind of becomes a kind of a rock star person. So there were composers who had a personality that people wanted to get to know. It includes, Beethoven fits into the earlier parts of the Romantic period, all the way up into, Debussy, Berlioz, some of these much more modern-ish, relatively modern composers. So it's pretty wide spectrum. I mean, it's 100 years of music being made. So we get these personalities that emerge where people wanted to interact with the composers, whereas before, in the days of like Bach and things, Bach was in his day kind of famous for being brilliant, but also, I mean, he was like a church employee, like he worked for the church and he wrote music. So we get into this era of much more kind of the composer being this ethereal being, someone who just like conjures music. And that leads to more programmatic music with a story behind it. And that leads to more experimenting with harmony. People trying to say, how can I use harmony to represent madness, right? It's going to be chromatic chords all over the place and things are just going to be going crazy. So there is a lot of that. There was also kind of a deep intellectual movement around the Romantic period related to the Industrial Revolution. So you get elements of industry working their way in, mechanics, machines. We see that even more in the 20th century, especially the earlier part of the 20th century. There's a real kind of convergence around 1920, 1930, where the end of the Romantic and the early 20th century merge, and you get like a lot of music that incorporates like machine sounds and like repetitive things. We'll talk more about that when we get into the 20th century, if we get there, which we probably will. But for now, just keep that in mind, that there's this industrial revolution happening. There's this idea of the composer being this magician of sound idea. And that's leading composers to really push the envelope. Push it to where? That is the subject of our very next video. And let's go there now and talk about chromaticism.